Now, is that just a natural extension of business is war, and we're going to take everything we can get? We're the biggest country. We'll have the most money someday. It's just our natural place to be in charge of things?
Yes. Philosophically, they see themselves as the middle kingdom, meaning, the kingdom between heaven and earth. And so they see themselves as Chairman Mao he would read books of philosophy, and there was one particular story about you cannot have two suns in the sky, and that had a profound impact on him. You can't have two suns in the sky. There was going to be one sun, and that one sun was going to be China. And so they think of themselves in a very profound way. America doesn't. We happen to be the most powerful country in the world and the richest, but that doesn't mean we're the biggest. And there's a lot of indicators against us at this moment. China has a long-term view that they're going to be that preeminent power.
Brian, you are president of the American Strategy Group, a think tank dedicated to understanding the strategic threats to the United States. Also a board member and senior fellow of the Claremont Institute, where you have been president for several years prior. And during your many years there, you've directed the Golden State Center in Sacramento. Well, you've got a lot of accomplishments here. Let me get the highlights. I got like a whole page of stuff you've done, and it's pretty impressive. But the parts that people here will care about is that you're the chairman of the Committee on the Present Danger, China, founded in March 2019. And also you were national security surrogate for Donald Trump at the Republican National Convention in Cleveland in 2016. Did I miss anything that would be important to our listeners to understand who you are?
No, I think you got that pretty well covered.
And we're going to talk about China. And I don't know that anybody in this country has a good understanding of what's going on over there, so I'm hoping you'll help us penetrate. And let me start with this general question that I think you can take and run with. What is it that you think the American public needs to understand about China that maybe they don't catch in the news, or their understanding is incomplete? What are the important things we need to know in a geopolitical sense?
Well, that's a great question to start off. And let me first say, Scott, what a great pleasure it is to be with you, because you're a great national treasure, and I think your way of thinking about the world has done more good in these last couple of years than almost anything else. But enough of that. China is one of those strategic concerns of the United States that most people don't quite comprehend, partly because they think we won the Cold War back in the 90s. We've been fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. And China, they're a new problem. They're a new kind of serious threat. I thought we trade with China. We buy stuff. Everybody knows Chinese people. They don't seem like bad people. They seem like good people. They're our neighbors. They're our friends.
They are?
They are, yeah, absolutely. And so when we encounter Chinese people, it's typically in a pretty favorable transaction. Right. And so it's hard for Americans to get their minds wrapped around that there is this country of 1.4 billion people, half a world away, that is causing us all these problems. But of course, President Trump ran on trying to make better trade deals with China. He didn't talk about them as a strategic threat, but just at the level of better trade deals, President Trump made the case to the American people that, in fact, a lot of our economic downturn, stagnation, whatever you want to call it, for the middle class of the country has been caused by these bad trade deals with China. They've taken our manufacturing, they've stolen our intellectual property, and most Americans are only now, I think, getting their minds wrapped around that narrative of the president.
Well, can you help us understand how much is just the Chinese are good at competing and they're taking the the board as it was presented to them, and they're just maximizing it exactly like we would have, versus something deeper and darker? What should we assume about their intentions?
Well, at the level of there's two points here. One is intellectual property theft. The Chinese are experts at either hacking into our systems and going in and stealing our intellectual property, or simply taking something that America's made, reverse engineering it, or more easily simply working with somebody in the company or the company itself to have a forced technology transfer. They say, if you want to come to China, we have to have a patent on this too, or we have to be co-owners of all this.
Now, I might need to break in a moment just for some clarification,
sure,
if you don't mind.
Sure.
My audience always yells at me when I interrupt anybody who's an expert, because they say, "You're not an expert. Let Brian talk." They're going to say that. But let me just understand this in context. An American tech company would probably routinely get a hold of a competitor's product and reverse engineer it if they thought there was some advantage they were trying to figure out. So if China does it in just the reverse engineering sense, isn't that completely normal?
Well, in America, if Google looks at what Apple's doing or vice versa, and Apple, says, wait, they've stolen something we've done, then they take them to court. In China, when you steal someone's if they steal the intellectual property, what's the recourse? It's very hard for that American company to go to a Chinese court and say, wait a minute, you've stolen what we've created here. And the Chinese say, no, of course not. We've not stolen anything. In fact, in these trade negotiations, the Chinese say, what intellectual property theft? In their mind, it's just good business. If they can steal something, they think that's just how the game is played. Now, in America, we would sue.
Now, literally, I want to understand this as specifically as possible. If we were to talk to a bunch of Chinese CEOs, let's say tech CEOs, and we said, it's bad business practice and it's bad for the world and you shouldn't be stealing other people's technology, would they look at you like they didn't even understand the point? I mean, do they even get the point that there's a long-term business benefit in dealing with people squarely versus just taking every advantage you could get? Is there a difference in the culture in terms of not understanding the long-term advantage of trust and building partnerships versus, well, if you left it on the table, I could just pick it up? Tell me about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point too. I think in part they think that's just how the game is played. It's often said about Chinese business deals and American business deals, first of all, you want to sell something and I want to buy something. If you sell it for $1 and I want to buy it for $1 and it's something I want, that's a good transaction. In China, it's thought that a good transaction is one where the Chinese are able to screw you, to be blunt. And that's a different way of thinking.
But now, do they apply the same thinking locally? In other words, when two Chinese companies are doing business, do they ever think in terms of, well, I want a win-win situation here because I want other people to, trust me and work with me, and I want everybody to win because in the long term that's better for everybody? Or do they also say, no, if I got one over on you, that's a good day for me?
Well, in all the writings culturally about Chinese business, it's the latter. If they can get away with it, they will. It's not that they're not forced very often to play fair, but it's usually, even on the local level, it's two competitors forcing each other to play fair.
Have you ever looked into the historical, cultural reason for that difference? I was reading this book called, American Nations? Something like that. It was talking about how our early business ethics, if you will, I think came from the Dutch. So the Dutch had sort of we'll deal with anybody, it just has to be fair. Everybody's playing fair, it doesn't matter who you are, we'll deal with you, but it just has to be fair. And I feel like that came from some sort of a Christian influence. Do you think that there's something in the Christian influence of Western business, even if you're not a Christian, you're still influenced by that that ethical standard. Do you think that just is lacking in China because there's not a religious kind of God's watching situation?
Well, perhaps. I certainly can see in America why that made sense to what you're describing. In China, I don't want to assign them that so much as they've not really lived under the rule of law and constitutional government the way we have, to where we automatically think in terms today of law and order. Just in terms of where it comes from, China has been living under a certain form of warlordism for thousands of years, to where it's all strength against strength and competition.
But where does the concept of family honor or personal honor come in? Because it seems to me it would be dishonorable. This is my Western brain, right? Dishonorable to screw somebody in a business deal when they would know it, and it would come back and haunt you, and people would say, this guy screws people in business deals. How is that not sort of a source of shame?
Yeah, I think it's partly that's just the way the cookie crumbles. to mix metaphors, they do have individual honor, certainly, but I do think they separate individual behavior from business behavior, and they think business more like they think of war, whether it's internally or externally, and business is like war, and all is fair in war. And so right. that goes beyond any kind of personal honor they may have.
Now, and I'm assuming that the big problem is that their government has these same set of, philosophies or ethics. And so tell us about China's government's intentions in the long run about the United States. What do you know about that?
Well, right now I'm chairing the Committee on the Present Danger China, and we've had several hearings. And we've had a lot of experts talk about what the intent of Chinese are. It's primarily to put China on top of the world as the hegemonic power. That doesn't mean China is going to invade the United States and we're all going to be speaking Chinese in a generation. What it does mean is that China is in the process of building their economy into the most powerful in the world, their military into the most preeminent power in the world, and that may still take some time. But they're going to take whatever steps are necessary to get there.
Right. Now, is that just a natural extension of business is war, and we're going to take everything we can get? We're the biggest country. We'll have the most money someday. It's just our natural place to be in charge of things?
Yes. Philosophically, they see themselves as the middle kingdom, meaning, the kingdom between heaven and earth. And so they see themselves as Chairman Mao he would read books of philosophy, and there was one particular story about you cannot have two suns in the sky. And that had a profound impact on him. You can't have two suns in the sky. There was going to be one sun, and that one sun was going to be China. And so they think of themselves in a very profound way. America doesn't. We happen to be the most powerful country in the world and the richest, but that doesn't mean we're the biggest. And there's a lot of indicators against us at this moment. China has a long-term view that they're going to be that preeminent power.
Now, does the United States not also want to be the most influential country and stay that way? I mean, because it sounds like what they want is pretty similar to what we want. Wouldn't we want to have enough control over the Middle East? Wouldn't we want to be able to get the trade deals we want? I mean, if we could get deals that were better for us than them, wouldn't we take it?
Maybe yes, maybe no. Right now we have a whole bunch of environmental policies, just to take one example, that disadvantage us with regards to China. China has all sorts of trade laws. China has access, before President Trump, to any U.S. market, or almost any U.S. market. the United States did not have a similar access. Now, why weren't U.S. leaders before Trump pressing for the United States to have that advantage? Because we thought we want China to develop. We want other countries to develop. And so we're not going to do everything in our power to keep all this manufacturing and wealth here. We're going to be willing to export it somewhere else. And that's been the globalist philosophy, I think, for the better part of 50 years, hasn't it?
But I think everybody would agree that there always had to be a time when China got strong enough that that situation would have to be readjusted. So this is the readjustment period, right?
Right. Yeah, this is the readjustment period. And so
that
yes,
seems like
you're right in that regard. You're certainly right that, you know, America wants to be on top, but we haven't pursued the policies that would keep us on top until now.
So, yeah. So what do you think is going to come out of the trade deal, and do you think we should decouple or try to make a deal?
Well, I mean, it'd be perfectly fine to do both in a way.
Say decouple.
Well, I'm certainly for decoupling, because I do think we can do all this manufacturing in the United States. And I think it's irresponsible, by the way, to have our electronics, especially those we use in the military, but even those we use in everyday, telecom equipment, made in China. That seems like just a silly proposition, given the fact about their theft of intellectual property.
So let me give you some hypotheticals here, just so I can understand, how the smart people think about this. Let's say, and I'm not saying this could ever happen, but let's say China made some kind of a promise about intellectual property that had a little bit of teeth in it. I don't even know if that's possible, but let's say they could. If that problem were solved, or even if we said, how about we just take technology out of it and we're not going to make that there, but everything else is still in play. Could we make a deal if we could solve the IP stuff, which I don't know if could be solved?
If we could make that deal and we had access to their markets, yes, absolutely, we could make a deal. The problem is they say they don't steal IP. They say that we don't steal it. That's a problem, and they're not going to allow any kind of enforcement regime that actually holds them to account. They've said as much.
So why are we even talking to them? What is honestly? What's the point? Can you tell me what smart person is saying, okay, we can still work with this? They say that no matter what we do, they're going to reach into our body cavity, rip our hearts out, and show it to us before we die. But I like all the rest of the stuff. So I think that still looks good. Well, except for that one part where they reach their fist into our chest, rip out our heart, and show it to us before they die. Is that what's happening? Is there somebody on the team that says, yeah, we can make this happening, even though the IP part can never happen? Is there anybody on that ship?
I think President Trump put Secretary Mnuchin and Robert Lighthizer, Ambassador Lighthizer, on the job to see if that's actually possible. And so the president didn't want to arbitrarily say what you just said, that this is hopeless. He wanted to make the case that I'm going to give it my best shot to negotiate something. If at the end of the day they're not willing to have any kind of acknowledgement and enforcement regime, then when I walk away from this, everyone can nod their head on Wall Street. By the way, Wall Street's the one pushing for the trade deal because they want the status quo, before Trump. But someone is trying to make the case that, in fact, a deal can be made. I don't think it actually can be made, but President Trump's giving it his best shot.
Do you think our government, and I almost don't want to ask this question because I think you might know the answer, and if it's the wrong answer, I'm just going to flip out. I swear to God, I'm going to flip out. Do you think our government would ever make a deal with China of any kind of trade deal before their top fentanyl dealer, whose name we know, the address is known? I think 60 Minutes interviewed him. Well, that guy's still a free man. Are we going to make a deal with China under that condition?
If President Trump understands that, the answer is absolutely no.
Thank you.
Yeah. On the other hand, a lot of things get presented to President Trump, and he doesn't. Look, he has to delegate a lot of this to other people.
But the fentanyl thing is so simple.
It seems so cut and dry. No, it's chemical warfare, biological warfare against the United States. It's crazy.
Right, but it's unambiguously easy to identify whether China is acting against it, because that guy's either alive or dead. We know his name, we know his face, we know his address, and we know China knows it. We know the guy, the specific guy, who's killing tens of thousands of Americans. If that guy's alive, I can't imagine the president, A, wouldn't understand that concept,
He'd understand
and B, would ever put us into a trade deal with mass murderers. I just don't see any way that anything but decoupling is going to happen here. If I had to place a bet on decoupling, how good a bet would it be?
I think it's probably, my own judgment today would be it's 80-20 that we're going to decouple. Like. That we're going to decouple again, from China, simply because their rhetoric has not changed. In fact, it's become more strident. They have the anniversary of their revolution coming up on October 1st. They see Trump, having to run for real circumstances. So they're going to their best. They're not going to make a deal now if they can wait and make a trade deal possibly with Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah. What? Oh my God. What is it that China can do that India can't do? And is there anything stopping us from saying, look, we tried China, but now India is our best friend. Watch what we do together. Because obviously Modi and Trump get along pretty well.
Oh, look, I think India is a very advanced country. And I don't see why there's anything. I think you're right. We should be doing business with India and other people around the world. There's no reason China should be locking all this, technological manufacturing. And if China wants to compete, they can compete, but they have to do it fairly and openly. And right now, they're not willing to do that. They think they can bully their way through almost anything.
Now, let's talk about the Uyghurs, the ethnic minority. They're Islamic, and they're being rounded up. I saw a video. Kyle Bass had it. Do you know if that? Do you have a sense of whether that video was real news or fake news? It showed I don't know, hundreds of Uyghurs lined up and handcuffed, and sitting there with things over their heads and stuff by the Chinese government. Do you think that was a real video?
I don't know. I've not gotten any confirmation one way or the other.
It's hard to know.
Right, but we see what they're doing in Hong Kong, if that's in parallel.
Right.
And so I can imagine they're doing that to the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs they like even less than the people of Hong Kong, who are ethnically Chinese. So I can imagine Uyghurs very badly. And so that is. Look, I think at some level they want people to see just how violent they are. They want people to see that they're willing to do anything, because a lot of people in the West, that will scare them. And so if China gets scaring the West as well, that's a benefit to them.
Yeah, you wrote a great article on that. Where can people find that?
I think that was on thehill.com, but I think it's also on presentdangerchina.org.
Right.
presentdangerchina.org.
So your view is that China gets a twofer with Hong Kong. One is that if they prevailed, and I believe they will in the long run, because they have the long view of things, it will first of all give them more control that they want, but it also shows the world, hey, there's not a line we're not willing to cross. So make sure you're nice to us. That's the basic idea?
That's a basic idea. I mean, in America, we have a mass aversion to violence. We don't like violence, and we're willing to do internally almost anything to avoid it. So when we see other countries engage in that kind of violence, we take a step back. Now, again, not President Trump. I'm talking about the liberal media, and it almost operates at a subconscious level. Whatever we can do to make them happy, maybe they'll stop hurting their own people. So they're almost keeping part of their people as hostages. Right. And they're tough guys. Look, they know how to intimidate 1.4 billion people into doing what they want. That's the height of sophistication.
So can you give us a little summary of what the average, let's say middle class and higher Chinese citizen can or does see on the internet? In other words, how much of the external truth are they seeing versus just China's version of truth?
I think they're mostly seeing the truth. I think there are times in which people can avail themselves of the truth, mostly through Western contact. But by and large, it's exactly what the government wants them to see. And also, they know they live in a kind of electronic surveillance. And there's still credit scoring. And so if you're somebody in China, in the middle class, and you're doing okay, you have, a wife, a kid, a job, a car, a house, are you going to risk that in China for trying to, illegally hack, get your way into and access Western information that your own government may be on? And I think the answer.
How many Chinese, actual Chinese citizens are going to college in the United States? Do you have an estimate for that?
I think right now it's about 50,000.
It seems to me that
almost 60, I think.
And would it be fair to say that those people are getting a full taste of non-China propaganda, or are they also maybe surveilled by China so that they can't even do a Google search without China knowing it? Do you have a sense of how tracked they are when they're in this country?
Well, it's hard to do all that. They certainly can be tracked. Whether China would expend resources on that, they certainly have the resources to monitor those Chinese nationals who are in this country. But again, once they're sent here, they're part of the Chinese elite. And those folks will self-regulate to a large degree because they want to go back home to China and be part of the Chinese elite.
But I get what you're saying about self-regulating, and certainly their self-interest is, let's just go back to China and live my great life. But they would still be infected with a set of knowledge that would not be common to the Chinese people, and it feels like that would seep out.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you this. Are we better off or worse off because we host so many Chinese students in our universities? Are we sending them back with like a little freedom virus that maybe they don't even know they have, but time goes by and they're like, I saw how America does it and I'm just not going to put up with this anymore? Are we winning or losing by educating their elite?
Yeah, probably, unfortunately, we're losing because we're exporting a knowledge base that they wouldn't otherwise be able to easily acquire. And they're taking that back and making China state of communism is still ruling the lives of those people. I'm not saying it's a total waste. I'm on the board of a Catholic high school, for instance, and we have 30 kids from China. And two of them, we heard the story recently, two of them FaceTime their parents. It's an all-boys school. They're 17 years old. They FaceTime their parents. Both these boys tell their father that they love them, and their fathers told them they love them back. And this was time in 17 years that had ever happened, that both sides had said, I love you. Now, I find that mind-blowing, that never in 17 years, my son and father said, this is after being in America at a Catholic school for 3 years.
That
you may call it an infection, whatever you want to say, but Americans and
what do you think of this idea? Suppose we said, hey, China, we're going to send back one student for every fentanyl death in this country. Do whatever you want. That's just our new system. We're just going to pick one, send them home, and there are 50,000 of them here, so that should take a little over 2 years to get rid of every Chinese student. How long would it take? In other words, I'm asking how important is it to China that they can get educations here? How long would it take before the elite said, wait a minute, my kid can't get the finest education because we're killing their citizens? I mean, do we really need to do that? I'd like my kid to get an education. How long would it take before that would change minds over there? Or would it?
It would probably change it immediately. The elites
Really?
very much want. Well, I think the
Really?
elites very much the elites very much want their children educated in the United. They want them exposed to Western, Western educations.
The genius of my idea is that they would know exactly why their kid got kicked out, and they're going to make a big stink about it. And so we would be weaponizing one person after another, one set of parents after another in the elite, to go back to their other elite and say, maybe this isn't going to work out just the way we want. I like the part where we kill Americans, but I don't like the part where my kid can't go to college there.
Yes,
just putting that out there.
I think good idea. Now, Scott, I noticed some people saying they can't hear me very well on the read.
So if you've seen my periscopes, you know that they say that all the time. There are two things.
You can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Okay. And in the replay, it's usually fine. Some people have problems on their end with their connection, and then they start complaining. And some of it is trolls just saying the sound is bad. They're trying to just interrupt the program. So I've got a number of other topics, but I want to give you as much time as you want to get your message out, because I think it's important, and people don't hear from this. What should I have asked about China? What's a theme that you'd really like to make sure we understand?
Well, I think the next phase of this whole trade debate is going to be around the fact that China defaulted on their sovereign debt, and that President Trump right now is trying on the opening of their markets and theft of intellectual property. I think one of the big things coming up is going to be the fact that China defaulted on their sovereign debt.
Define sovereign debt in this context for the audience, because I don't think they understand. This is historical, different government system debt, right?
Yes. Back in the last century, early in the last century, when they had their revolution from the state republic, global capital bonds, the way the U.S. government has U.S. Treasury bonds, China had China bonds. And they went and they raised money to have their revolution or consolidate their revolution, and for China to become the country it is today, even though they're from a republic to a communist government. Well, they quit paying back in 1998. Again, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, other than to say China global system where they engage in trade, borrow money. Now, let me go with the present, then we can jump back. Right now, China is talking about coming to Wall Street over the next 5 years and having new sovereign debt and debt of their state-owned enterprises for between $1 to $3 trillion over the next 5 years.
No frickin' way, unless they pay off the debt they already have, right?
And you would think before they do that, they pay off the debt that they previously owe. Now, they paid the British back in the 90s because Margaret Thatcher stood up to them, and they were negotiating Hong Kong and a bunch of other things.
Right.
But now they want back to American capital markets to borrow trillions of dollars. They haven't made good on this debt.
Wow.
And President knows about it, and the administration, I think we're going to see is also that over that money that 20,000 families in, I think, 46 states own. And the Chinese money, and they owe the American people money.
Can I interrupt you? The audience is going nuts. Let me just say to the audience, I'm not going to reboot. There's nothing I can do about it. I know you're having a little crackling with the sound. You don't have to all tell us. A few of us told us, and now I understand. All right. So the sovereign debt, in other words, these are bonds. What do you call them? Are they bonds?
Yes. Yes, they're bonds.
So I've pushed the idea that China likes their social credit scoring system, but they might like less if we created, and I mean literally created, some kind of a business credit scoring system and score them, unworthy of business, because you've got your debt that they won't pay, you've got your China deal that they're trying to abrogate, you've got the stealing of the IP, you've got the fentanyl, et cetera. And I think you could just make a checklist and say, if anybody's got 5 of the things on this checklist, they're not creditworthy. Just make it a banking issue, because banks are completely risk management objective. It's not political, it's just risk management.
You think in a rational world that's exactly how it would work. In the case of being selected, that would be on any investment house would have to show to any individual investor.
Right.
As Wall Street, powerful lobby on China, as Wall Street firms, the Goldman Sachs of the world and the Morgan Stanleys, that are going to be out there selling this debt to investors and making the commission on all these debts. Wall Street has no interest in highlighting all these facts to either the American people or specifically to the investors with whom they want to, or for whom they want to sell this debt.
Well, maybe there's some solution where the investors and the public says, well, I don't want to deal with a Wall Street company that would take such a bad loan on, because why would I invest in that company? They've got troubles. Brian, I'm going to move on to another topic. I think we hit the big stuff. Do you feel like we?
I did.
Do you feel like we hit the big stuff?
I did.
And thank you so much. Where can we find you on Twitter, let's say?
It'll be on the presentdangerchina.org, and then the Twitter handle is at Britrav Kennedy, BRITRAV Kennedy.
All right, at BRI...
TRAV, BRITRAV Kennedy.
All right, so follow him on Twitter. I'm going to disconnect you now, Brian, and go on to some other stuff, and thank you so much. That was really good. I think the audience loved it. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Thanks.